Anthony, do you remember the days when it was like bring your own cup day at 7-Eleven for Slurpee and people would show up with like 5-gallon buckets?
I vaguely remember that. Also remember like those 44-ounce like big gulp
Yes.
drinks. Do they still have that?
I don't know. We don't have a 7-Eleven here, so I couldn't tell you.
Tennessee, what are you doing?
I don't know. Get your act together, Tennessee. All right, Isaiah, thank you for that. Right now, we're going to welcome our next live guest. We've got Rachel Premack with us today, talking a little bit about marijuana, legalized marijuana, and if it could lower the rate of truck accidents. Rachel, thank you for joining us. This is a pretty interesting topic.
Yeah, so the study, this is the first study actually on legalized recreational cannabis and trucking accidents, and we got the first look into it.
And so, Rachel, when we're looking into this, what are going to be some of the variables or some of the factors when you're talking about the use of medical marijuana?
Yeah, so what the researchers found is that basically what the researchers found is that in 8 states where they legalized recreational marijuana, from looking at large truck crash statistics from 2005 to 2019, we saw an overall decline in crashes by 11%. In 2 out of those 8 states, crashes actually increased. And researchers are still trying to figure out why exactly this happened. They have a few different theories. One is that those who might normally be drinking alcohol instead switched to marijuana. And even though, driving sober is the most safe way and the only recommended way to drive, it is actually far safer to be driving under the influence of marijuana than driving under the influence of alcohol. Of course, again, being sober is the safest way to get behind the wheel. And marijuana is usually consumed at home rather than at a bar or a restaurant. And kind of the implications of this research isn't that drivers or anyone, commercial or non-commercial drivers, should be consuming marijuana before getting behind the wheel. That is absolutely not the recommendation from this study. But the researchers, when I spoke to them, said, if additional research and additional studies into this reach a similar conclusion that legalized marijuana does not increase the rate of accidents, then lawmakers should consider, reassessing or reanalyzing the current policy that says that truck drivers, even if they live in states with legal marijuana, that they cannot partake in consuming it.
So I think something that's really interesting when you get into the marijuana versus alcohol debate is you have to think about how quickly each of those substances impacts your body and then how long it stays in your system, right? Because when you're talking about drinking alcohol and then getting behind the wheel, you're talking about those impacts being felt in the near term, like 2 to 8 hours from behind consumption of that alcohol, but marijuana stays in your system for a long time. So if a driver is using it at home recreationally, legally, gets behind the wheel a day or 2 later, isn't necessarily under the influence at the time, but then undergoes a randomized drug test and pops positive for the marijuana, then it's kind of that gray area, right? So does this study look at that at all and talk about the differences between a driver who's actually driving while under the influence versus driving and then found out to have used marijuana in the recent time, just enough that it's recent enough that it would pick up on a test?
Yeah, the researchers didn't really drill down to individual crashes or looking at whether it was the passenger car or the truck driver or who exactly involved may have been under the influence of anything. They just looked at these 8 states, when they legalized recreational marijuana, how did this change the truck crash rate? And that's all they looked at. It was very... it was a bit more of a binary look into rather than sort of delving into individual crashes. The one thing that's interesting about that, though, is that it's true. You can't, with alcohol, you can do a breathalyzer and say this person is under the influence of alcohol right now. Whereas with marijuana, you really can only do a urine test, and that says, okay, this person has used marijuana sometime in the last 30 days. The problem with this is that, you can do a urine test for someone who has used cocaine or methamphetamines or opioids, more recently than the last 30 days. They could have used it a week or several days ago, and it wouldn't show up on a urine test the same way that marijuana would. And researchers have kind of come, not just this study, but kind of the general scientific consensus is that marijuana is much safer than cocaine or methamphetamines or other sort of forms of opioids. So it's definitely something that needs a little bit more further research and definitely more developments to see if there's a way we can test for marijuana in the moment or test for cocaine or meth or opioids longer than just that 1 to 2 day time frame. So that's why some trucking fleets are even moving to hair follicle testing, which shows a much longer time frame than just 1 to 2 days.
Rachel, one of the first things I learned about from a driver's perspective about what's really important when you're making so many of these trips is the quality of sleep that you get. Are there any talks around potentially using marijuana or this recreational marijuana as a sleep aid that could potentially ease in some of these incidents that are happening with some potentially tired drivers?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And that's one kind of way to look at this issue is that I think it's at this point, the majority of states have medicinal marijuana legalized. You can get it in a variety of states. Utah has medicinal marijuana. It's a pretty common policy in most states, but truck drivers are not able to use cannabis for medical purposes. And on top of that, because CBD sometimes comes up as THC in these drug tests, many truck drivers just even avoid CBD, which is federally legal. So this definitely prevents truck drivers from using this medicine that many Americans do have access to treat chronic pain, anxiety, sleep issues, as you mentioned. So it's definitely because truck drivers do have pretty severe chronic health issues that are more intensified than the general population, especially looking at, chronic pain or mental health issues, or sort of increased risk for other lifestyle diseases. I think it is worth looking into, okay, how can we ensure truck drivers do have access to a full range of sort of medical treatments for their various ailments, while not increasing or endangering other people on the road.
While also making sure that the access to those alternative medicines isn't a threat to their employment as well. Rachel, thank you for joining us this morning. Great to have you as always, and a very interesting thing to watch for. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.